I set the letter down on the kitchen table and sat there for a long time without moving. My coffee went cold. The morning light shifted across the floor the way it always does in October, slow and pale through the window above the sink. I've lived in this house for 31 years. I know every creak in the hallway, every draft that comes under the back door in November. I know which step on the staircase groans if you put your weight on the left side. This house is the only place in the world that has ever felt completely mine. It almost wasn't anymore. I need to back up. I need to tell you how it started, or none of the rest of it will make sense. My name is Edward. I'm 64 years old. I worked 37 years as a civil engineer for the county, retired 5 years ago with a decent pension and more grey hair than I know what to do with. My wife, June, passed away 11 years ago this spring. Breast cancer. She was 53. We had 30 years together, and I won't pretend the last 11 have been easy without her, but I built a life. I kept the house. I kept the yacht she loved. I kept going. We had one son. His name is Derek. Derek is 38 now. He's smart, always was. The kind of smart that impresses people at dinner parties but doesn't always translate into good judgment. He got his MBA from a state school, married a woman named Amber about 6 years ago, and they live about 40 minutes from me in a newer development out past the highway. Nice neighborhood, big garage, more house than they needed, but that was always Derek's way. I helped with the down payment, $60,000. I didn't loan it, I gave it. I remember writing the check and thinking June would have wanted that. She would have wanted Derek settled. What I didn't realize was that giving Derek that $60,000 was in his mind an opening bid. After that, it was never quite enough. Small things at first. He'd mentioned the property taxes were brutal this year, and somehow I'd end up mailing a check. Amber's car needed work. I covered it. Their son, my grandson Tyler, needed braces, and they had the insurance gap. I filled it. I'm not listing these things to complain. I'm listing them because you need to understand what kind of father I tried to be, and what I thought I was building. I thought I was building trust. About 2 years ago, Derek started coming around more often. Once a week sometimes, which was more than he visited in years. I was glad for the company. The house gets quiet. I cooked dinner, we watched football, and it felt like something I'd been missing without knowing how much. I let my guard down completely. That's the only way I can explain what happened next. I keep a fireproof lockbox on the shelf in my bedroom closet. June and I bought it maybe 25 years ago, back when people still kept physical copies of everything important. Inside, both our birth certificates, the deed to the house, June's death certificate, my will, a folder of old insurance documents, and a small spiral notebook where I keep account numbers, passwords, and pins written in my own shorthand. June and I developed that system together years ago, nothing stored digitally for the really sensitive things. Old-fashioned, I know, but it had worked for decades, so I never saw a reason to change it. Derek knew the lockbox existed. He'd seen it as a teenager. I'd shown him once where it was when June first got sick, so that he'd know where to find important documents if something happened to me. I told him that in confidence, the way you tell your son something you trust him with. I never told him where I kept the key. The key lives on a small hook inside the back of my nightstand drawer, underneath a false bottom I made myself out of a thin piece of plywood. June thought I was being paranoid when I built it. I told her I'd watched too many crime shows. She laughed. That little hidden bottom was her private joke for years. She'd knock on my nightstand and say, "How's the spy headquarters?" I don't know exactly when Derek found it. I don't know how many times he opened that box before I figured out anything was wrong. What I know is that sometime in the months he was visiting regularly, he got into my notebook. He found the account numbers. He found the pins. My main checking account, the one my pension deposits into, the one I've had since 1987, has a pin I never bothered to change because I never imagined needing to. It's the street number of the house June and I rented the first year we were married, 147. The address was on Linden Street, in a little town about 2 hours from here. We were broke and happy, and the radiator didn't work, and none of that mattered. I chose that number 30 years ago because I thought I'd never forget it, and because no one else in the world would know it, except I'd written it in the notebook. And Derek had been in my bedroom. The first time I noticed something off, I chalked it up to my own mistake. I went to the ATM to take out $200 for some cash I needed, and the balance on the screen was lower than I expected, a few $100s lower. I stood there in the parking lot of the grocery store and tried to remember if I'd paid something I'd forgotten about. Couldn't think of anything. Figured I must have miscounted somewhere, deposited what I needed and moved on. That was in January. By April, I started keeping closer track. I sat down with 3 months of statements and I found it. Withdrawals I hadn't made. Not huge amounts, but consistent. 200 here, 300 there. Once 500. All ATM withdrawals, all at machines nowhere near my usual stops. The total across those 3 months was just over $2,000. I'm not a suspicious man by nature. I've never liked conflict. Ask anyone who knows me and they'll tell you Edward is the one who keeps the peace, who finds the middle ground, who gives people the benefit of the doubt. So my first instinct, even looking at those statements, was to find an explanation that didn't involve someone I trusted. Maybe my card had been skimmed somewhere. Maybe there'd been some kind of bank error. I called the bank and asked them to check for fraud. They checked. No flags. The withdrawals were made with the physical card and the correct PIN. No location anomalies that would trigger an alert. As far as the bank system was concerned, I had made those withdrawals myself. I asked them to send me a list of the exact ATM locations. 3 were at a grocery store chain in the town where Derek lives. 1 was at a gas station 6 blocks from his house. I looked up the addresses on my phone and sat with that for almost an hour before I let myself believe what I was looking at. I didn't confront him right away. I know that might seem strange, but I needed to be certain. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I said a word, because I knew that once I said it, things would never go back to the way they were. I ordered a small home security camera, just one, the kind that looks like a smoke detector, and mounted it in my bedroom doorway while Derek was out of town one weekend with Amber and Tyler. I positioned it so it showed the bedroom closet and part of the nightstand. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. 3 weeks later, Derek came for dinner on a Tuesday. I made chili, the same recipe I've been making since the 80s. We ate, we talked, nothing unusual. He used the bathroom, said he wanted to grab a jacket he'd left in my room from the last visit. I went to the kitchen to start on the dishes. I watched the footage that night after he left. He went into my room. He went directly to the closet. He knew exactly where the lockbox was, pulled it out from behind my winter coats without any hesitation. Then he went to the nightstand, opened the top drawer, pressed along the bottom panel until it gave. He'd obviously done this before. His movements were practiced and quick, and lifted out the key. He opened the lockbox, flipped to a page in my notebook, took a photo of it with his phone, closed everything up, put it back, replaced the key, and walked out. The whole thing took 4 minutes. 4 minutes. 37 years of his father working, saving, sacrificing, and he went through it in 4 minutes like he was checking a file cabinet that belonged to him. I turned off the camera footage and sat at my kitchen table for a very long time. I want to be honest about what that night felt like, because I think it's important. I didn't cry. I wanted to, maybe, but nothing came. What I felt was something deeper than hurt, a kind of settling, the way the ground feels solid under your feet after you realize you've been walking on ice. Part of me, a part I hadn't wanted to listen to, had already known. The visits getting more frequent. The questions about the house, about my pension, about what I planned to do with things when I was gone. I had told myself he was just being thoughtful, that he was being a son. What he was doing was calculating. I didn't call him, I didn't send a text, I made a list. First, I contacted my attorney, A man I've used for years named Howard, who helped me draft my will after June passed. I told him what I'd found and showed him the camera footage and the bank statements. Howard is not a man who raises his voice or shows much reaction to anything, but when I showed him the footage, he leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "Edward, this is financial elder abuse. In this state, that is a criminal offense." I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd thought of it as a betrayal. Howard was right to reframe it. Second, I went to my bank. I brought the statements, the list of ATM locations, and a printed still from the camera footage showing Derek at the lockbox. I spoke to the branch manager directly. She was professional and thorough. She froze the account, opened a fraud investigation, issued me a new card, and helped me set up account alerts for any withdrawal over $50. She also said the footage and location data would likely be enough to support a police report. Third, I changed every lock in the house. Every single one. The front door, the back door, the side garage entrance. I called a locksmith that same week and had new deadbolts installed. I moved the lockbox to a new location Derek had never seen. I changed every pin I had. All of them. None of them meaningful dates anymore. All of them randomly generated and stored in a way Derek could never access. Then I waited again. Derek called me on a Thursday evening, about 2 weeks after I'd started the process. His voice was normal, easy, the way it always is. He asked if I wanted to come to Tyler's soccer game on Saturday. I said I wasn't feeling great and maybe next time. He said, "Sure, no problem, talk soon." He had absolutely no idea. I was served paperwork by the bank's fraud team in the following week, confirming that the investigation had identified $9,400 in unauthorized withdrawals over 7 months. $9,400. That number landed differently than I expected. It wasn't the money exactly. I had the money. I wasn't going to go without because of it. It was the 7 months. 7 months of dinners and football games and phone calls about Tyler's homework, all while my own son was systematically emptying my account $200 and $300 at a time. 7 months of looking me in the eye. Howard filed a civil suit. The bank filed a separate fraud report with local law enforcement. I won't go into all the procedural details because honestly even I had trouble following all of it. But the short version is that Derek was contacted by the authorities approximately 3 weeks after the bank's investigation closed. He called me before he called a lawyer. That tells you something. He called on a Sunday morning. I was sitting on the back porch with my coffee, watching the birds at the feeder June planted 30 years ago, which I've refilled every single week since she died. I saw his name on my screen, and I answered. He started talking fast. Said it was a misunderstanding. Said he'd been under enormous pressure with the business, that Amber had been struggling, that he never meant for it to go this far. He used the word borrow 4 times in the first 2 minutes. Said he was going to pay it back, that he'd always planned to pay it back, that he'd always planned to pay it back. I let him talk until he ran out of things to say. Then I said, "Derek, I have footage of you going through my lockbox. I have the ATM records. The bank has already filed a report, and so has my attorney. I don't have anything to explain to you." There was a long silence. Then he said, "Dad, come on. You have more than you'll ever spend. You're sitting in that house alone. I needed it." I've thought about that sentence a lot since then. You have more than you'll ever spend. As if the amount I had was the point. As if the fact that I'd worked 37 years and lived carefully and saved so that I would never be a burden on anyone. As if that was a character flaw. As if having enough meant it was available for the taking. I said, "I hope you find a good attorney." And I hung up. Amber called twice that afternoon. I didn't answer. She left one voicemail, which I saved for Howard. In it she said, and I'm not exaggerating, that I was being dramatic, that families work things out without lawyers, and that if I proceeded with this, I would be hurting Tyler most of all. I've thought about Tyler a great deal. He's 8 years old. He didn't ask for any of this. He calls me Grandpa Ed, and he likes when I show him how things work, how the water heater functions, how to read a level, The things my own father showed me. I love that boy without reservation, but I also know that if I let this go, if I let Derek believe that the consequences of what he did could be made to disappear by invoking Tyler's name, I would be teaching my grandson something terrible. I would be teaching him that accountability has an escape hatch, that if you choose the right pressure point, you can avoid the consequences of anything. I wasn't willing to teach him that. The civil case settled in mediation 8 months after I filed. Derek agreed to full repayment of the $9,400 plus interest and legal fees, just over $11,000 total, and he completed a court-mandated financial counseling program as part of a deferred arrangement with the DA's office that allowed him to avoid a criminal conviction, provided he completed all terms and had no further incidents. Howard also helped me revise my will completely. The house, which had always been intended for Derek, is now going to a land trust with a small portion set aside for Tyler's education in a custodial account that Derek cannot touch. The remainder of my estate is split between 2 charities June cared about, a literacy program, and a hospice organization that supported our family during her illness. Derek knows about the will. I told him myself, on a phone call about a month after the mediation closed. I didn't do it to punish him, though I understand if he feels that way. I did it because it was the honest thing to do, and because I've been done with pretending for a while now. He didn't say much. He said he guessed he understood. I don't know if that's true. What I know is that on the morning after I made that call, I went out and refilled the bird feeder. The morning was cold, the kind of sharp October cold that makes the air feel clean. I stood in the backyard for a few minutes and looked at the yard, the raised beds June built in the corner, the old oak tree that drops acorns every fall, the fence I repaired myself 2 summers ago because I wasn't ready to pay someone to do something I could still do. This yard, this house, 31 years of a life. Nobody is taking it from me, not for want of trying. There's one more thing I want to say, and I want to say it carefully, because I've thought about it a great deal. People ask me. Friends. My neighbor Dale, who I told some of this to, even Howard asked once in a roundabout way, whether I feel guilty, whether I second-guess what I did, whether a father should pursue legal action against his own son. Here's what I've figured out about that question. It assumes that what I did was the aggressive act. It assumes that I escalated something. But I didn't start anything. I tried to raise a son who understood what it means to earn something, to respect what belongs to someone else, to look his father in the eye without calculation. Somewhere along the way, something went wrong, and I'll spend a long time wondering how much of that was my fault. Maybe I gave too much too easily. Maybe I said yes when I should have said no, and Derek learned the wrong thing from that. But here's what I know for certain. When I discovered what he was doing, I had 2 choices. I could pretend I didn't see it, and let it continue, and let Derek go the rest of his life believing that his father's trust was a resource to be mined. Or I could make clear, quietly, legally, completely, that it was not. I chose the second thing. I would choose it again. The bird feeder is full, the locks are new, the coffee is hot, and the morning light is doing that slow October thing across the kitchen floor, and this house is mine. I find that's enough. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. That's one thing about living alone. The quiet doesn't let you avoid much. You think through things fully whether you want to or not. What I keep coming back to isn't the money. $9,400 is real, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't matter. But I've spent more than that on Derek over the years without a second thought. What I keep coming back to is the 4 minutes. The way he moved through my bedroom like he already owned it. No hesitation, no glance over his shoulder, no moment where you could see him weighing what he was doing. He had done it enough times that it had become routine. That's the part I can't quite put down. There's a version of this story where I do nothing, where I see those ATM locations, recognize them for what they are, and decide the cost of knowing's too high. I've met people who've made that choice, Parents who found out something about a child and decided that silence was a form of love. I don't judge them. I understand the impulse. You raise someone. You remember who they were at 4 years old, at 10, at 17. You don't want the thing you've discovered to be the truest thing about them. But here's what I've come to believe. Letting it go wouldn't have protected Derek. It would have protected my idea of Derek. And those are two completely different things. What Derek didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened after years of me filling every gap, covering every shortfall, saying yes when the honest answer was that he needed to figure it out himself. I'm not absolving him. He made his choices, and they were wrong, fully and clearly wrong. But I played a part in building a man who believed that his father's resources existed for his convenience. Every time I wrote a check without question, I taught him something. I just didn't know what I was teaching. That's the part that belongs to me, and I've sat with it honestly. What I did when I found out, going to Howard, going to the bank, changing the locks, revising the will, none of that was revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I think people sometimes confuse consequences with retaliation. I wasn't trying to hurt Derek. I was trying to stop something that was wrong and to make clear, in terms he could not misread, that actions carry weight, that what you take from someone without permission is not yours just because you want it, that a father's trust is not a line of credit. Tyler is 8 years old. I think about him more than anything else in this whole mess. I think about what he's watching, what he's absorbing, what he'll carry forward from seeing how the adults in his life handle difficulty. I don't want him to grow up believing that the people who love you are the safest ones to take from. I want him to grow up understanding that integrity isn't what you perform for strangers. It's what you do when no one is watching, or when you think no one is watching. The camera was watching. But even if it hadn't been, it still would have been wrong. I refilled the bird feeder this morning, same as I do every week, same feeder, same spot in the yard, same birds that June would have known by name. There's a kind of steadiness in that, in doing the small things consistently, in keeping your word to yourself about who you are. That's what I want to hold on to. Not the lawsuit, not the settlement, not any of it. Just the steadiness, just the knowledge that when it mattered, I saw clearly and I acted honestly, and I didn't pretend. That's the only inheritance worth passing on.